on the trying to show the presentation. Oh no. Good evening, everyone. Could I just ask what you can see on the screen, please?
We can see the presentations, Lucille.
It says innovation, digital innovation, fintech, and future tech.
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Okay, because the border is around different documents, so I'm happy that you can see that. That's great. Okay, I'm still just waiting for the confirmation to go ahead, but whenever you're ready on that side, I'm ready.
Good evening. Members are logging in, so you can go ahead.
Okay, great. So just to say to Mbombo, not to worry, everything's okay. We've got the right screen up, and we'll proceed. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lucy Abrams. I am at the Link Center at Wits University in Johannesburg. I'm not sure what to say about myself. I'm really more interested in who you are, but perhaps for this particular occasion, because I see Chairperson Maneli is there. Perhaps I should hand back to you for a moment, Chairperson, to just welcome everyone. No, not yet. Mbombo, please tell Chairperson Maneli he's welcome to interrupt me at any point and say a few words. But I think, okay. We are now currently 49 people in the meeting. For the purposes of this particular meeting, I think what's important about my background is that I have worked for several decades in the field of digital innovation in particular, but innovation more broadly. Perhaps just for this quick introduction, So I've worked in the broad science system. I believe that there are some members of the Science and Technology Portfolio Committee with us today. Perhaps just for this quick introduction. I'm very familiar with the national system of innovation. And in that national system of innovation, which I'll say a few words about during the course of our engagement, we have many science performing institutions. In fact, South Africa has a history of science performing institutions. A long history in the defense environment, in the manufacturing, the building, the construction, the human sciences, the agricultural sciences, the geosciences. We have an extensive institutional history. Where we have a more limited institutional history and science practice, particularly digital innovation practice, is in the many fields where digital innovation and digital applications are really changing the world today. And that stretches from anything from precision agriculture to brain science to future manufacturing, robotic collaboration. These are areas where South Africa has not yet built a significant institutional and technology-oriented skills environment. So we're going to talk about how we bring together ideas from the broader field of innovation for which the national system of innovation is funded. It's publicly funded, it's privately funded. It's a key institutional context for South Africa. It's very crucial to our global competitiveness. And so this is really the nature of our discussion this evening. And I'm deliberately calling it a discussion. It's not a lecture. I do have a fair number of slides, but what I'd like to do is to stop intermittently to engage in a few points of discussion, a few points of conversation. The reason for our meeting today on the 3rd of September is that members of the Portfolio Committee are engaged in a lecture series on a wide range of aspects of digital infrastructure and digital innovation, because this relates to the mandate of the Portfolio Committee with respect to their role in overseeing the policy environment, overseeing the regulatory environment, and of course, lawmaking. But in today's context, lawmaking takes place less regularly, whereas policy making and regulation takes place almost on a daily basis. And of course, we see rapid change in the environment for regulation. And while today's session is not intended to focus intensely on the subject of regulation, it is rather looking at the environment, the context, the landscape in which regulation occurs. A more and more complex environment, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, the context of digital services, digital infrastructure and services was not in any way as complex as it is today. So we often talk about the fourth industrial revolution, but I wanted to just, as a way of setting the scene, comment on the fact that there are different views on which revolution we're in, how many revolutions there have been. One view, it's a particular view expounded by the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab in particular, but others argue that we are somewhere between the fifth, or rather the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth industrial revolution. Some may argue that for many people on the African continent, we are merging the third industrial revolution, the age of electricity, with the fourth, with the fifth, with the sixth. So these transitions, which take place over decades and decades and extended periods of time, the electrification, the mass production, the electronics and communications networks, and the sustainable development or the green techno-economic paradigm are ways of understanding the nature of innovation and development. Others might even say that what we are experiencing now is not an industrial revolution as such, but it is a combination of an industrial, services, technological, and social development revolution. Just to talk very quickly about cycles of innovation, that innovation is not simply the end product. South Africans now hunting the coronavirus immunity are dealing with many aspects of innovation, not only vaccine innovation. So vaccine innovation is one of the multiple innovations that we are seeking in order to counteract this pandemic. And in the early stages of innovation, the focus is on the idea. How do we solve a problem? How do we address a need using ideas? Well, we have to engage in R&D, which has many complex steps. We want to prototype or license. The vaccine will be licensed, for example. It will then be commercialized, but it will also be socialized because this vaccine is not going to be affordable by many millions of people in South Africa, on the continent, many billions of people across the world. And so governments will have to purchase that vaccine on behalf of citizens in their countries and apply that vaccine in social contexts. And so what we also see is significant business development. Business development, if we're talking about commercialization, and a services revolution, if we're talking about socialization. That we are literally seeing, because of innovation in general and digital innovation in particular, we are seeing a revolution in all kinds of services, not only privately provided services like banks and financial services, but in government services, in the transition to digital government. Yes, that transition is taking an inordinately long time. But on this point, I quickly want to mention what I was doing just 2 hours ago today. We were online, also on MS Teams, with a group of teachers located in the towns in and around Saldanha Bay. That is the location of the Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone. This is a long-term project for Saldanha Bay to be a port, an open port where all kinds of maritime innovation is taking place and where there is international trade flowing through that port at Saldanha Bay. There has already been significant investment in creating the infrastructure for the Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone. And one of the key questions is, who are going to be the scientists, the marine engineers, the professionals, the technicians, the technical staff, the people providing restaurant services, and all manner of services in that Saldanha Bay or to that Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone. And so we are seeing the initial stages of a focus on teaching teachers to use applications in digital software to teach grade 8 and grade 9 mathematics online. And that's what I was doing just about an hour ago. I'm sitting in Johannesburg. There are 2 academics from the University of Stellenbosch sitting in Stellenbosch. There are teachers sitting in various towns around Saldanha Bay. And we are all online, moving triangles, lines, graphs in cyberspace. That is the new approach to education. It is currently perhaps not yet affordable. This is trial and error. We're learning as we go along. This is not currently present in schools. But this is where we will have to go with primary and secondary school education if we are to produce the future marine engineers for the Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone and for others such as Mucha, etc., etc. We have many SBIDZs. We also have many manufacturing centers. We also have many financial services centers. And so we are looking at technology, digital technologies, in the last few years, some of which have limited impact, very low impact, some of which have medium impact, some of which have high impact, and some of which have transformational impact. And I'm going to focus, for example, in a little while on 3D printing. Autonomous vehicles, we hear a lot about. They may not be the key thing for South Africa, the key thing for development in South Africa. But 3D printing almost certainly is. Advanced robotics almost certainly is. And what's crucial for South Africa is that we don't want to simply be the users. We want to be producers of these transformational technologies. And this is what the recent adoption of the National Digital Skills Strategy by Cabinet relates to. Would someone like to make a quick point or ask a question? We're just coming up on half an hour. Mbombo, I see your mic is on. Anyone is welcome to make a contribution at this point. No. Okay. So the logic here of the narrative that I'm presenting is that the South African government has, over the past 20 years, adopted many policies. Some of those policies have been innovation policies. There was an R&D strategy in 2002. There was the 10-year innovation plan in 2018. There was a white paper on science and innovation. We also adopted a number of strategies in the digital environment. There was a white paper on ICT policy in 2016. There was a broadband policy in 2013. There's a national digital skills strategy in 2020. And we really have to look at all of these strategies stroke policies as a set, an ecosystem of policies. We'll come to regulation, we'll come to regulatory issues in a moment, but as a set of policies that influence lawmaking, regulation, but most importantly, they influence the real practice of innovation and digital innovation to imbue our economic sectors and our social sectors with greater competitiveness and greater value. So, for example, if we take the South African mining sector, which we know has been in decline since the 70s, we cannot do deep mining. It is too dangerous for human beings. Many miners have already lost their lives just mining at levels where there appears to have been some social consensus that human beings will mine in those conditions. We now have technologies that enable us to increase mining safety significantly, and B, we have technologies that will enable us to mine in previously unsafe environments where we cannot send human beings, but we can send digital technologies. This is one of the possible applications for robotics in the future. And what that does is it enables the South African economy to look at future options for mining to continue as a major economic venture, a major contribution to GDP. Similarly, we can look at the manufacturing sector. And again, the manufacturing sector has been declining in competitiveness. It is not as competitive even as countries that we previously competed well against. This includes a few African countries. The Nigerian economy is strong. The Egyptian economy is strong. So global competition has become more difficult, particularly for small countries, countries with small populations like South Africa. And technology, or rather science and technology, is always able to give some form of edge to economic production. Now, these technologies here are just a sample. They are really a sample of the available digital technologies. They are perhaps even a small sample. And what we see is that if we look at the one in red, emerging, so they're in the very early stages, quantum computing, swarm computing. At the time when this was written in 2016, these were technologies that were only emerging, but in a period of very short period of time, 3 or 4 years, 5G is not just an idea anymore, it's real. Swarm computing, there are now many applications of swarm computing that are actually being used, where, for example, multiple drones or unmanned aerial vehicles are operating in swarms to capture data. That data could be agricultural information, it can be climate information, it can be weather-related information, so that we improve the quality, for example, of our weather predictions. Here in Joburg, we were told that the last 2 days were going to be sunny days, when in fact it was one of the coldest days. So we really need to have greater attention to more precise assessments and information like weather information, climate information, managing climate change better, and so on. Just to point out that there are many aspects of innovation. We tend to focus a lot on product innovation. But product innovation is not the only form of innovation. Product innovation, we can see, we can hold it in our hand very often. Process innovation is less visible, but still very important, because what is happening is that we can now complete processes more securely and more quickly. I want to mention one particular example, which I'm going to come back to later. In the financial services sector, for example, banks and financial services, banks, insurance, assurance, and so on. Those processes are now highly automated. And those automated processes mean that there is less risk of, I don't know, paying out the wrong person, for example. Because the processes are managed securely, the data is cleaned, the data is analyzed. There's a lot of data science sitting behind process innovation. There's a lot of innovation in networks, and we now know that, beyond road networks, and when we cannot use road networks, all those invisible networks, absolutely invisible, 4G and even 5G networks currently are being used to continue whatever form of national communication, national economic transactions, trade, regional trade, global trade is possible. A lot of that is happening on 4G and 5G networks. And we also talk about channels. There's a lot of talk about channels now, a lot of talk about the service experience. So I really just wanted to point out that innovation is not just product oriented. And what that gives us, and I'm going to pause here for some contributions from your side. What that gives us is that in this era, in this period, 2020, we've seen this build up from, I don't know when you got your first cell phone. I think I got my first mobile phone in about 2005. I got my first ATM card in about 1997. And these last 3 decades or 2.5 decades have taken us on a path of digital transformation in economic sectors, in government, and in society more broadly. We may think that smart cities and smart villages are a thing of the future, or smart industries, smart health, smart transport. But really, they are with us. They may not be highly evolved, but we are already on the road to smart cities, smart villages. The basic mobile phone is connecting all manner of activities in people living in cities, people living in villages. You could say that industry is lagging behind, health is lagging behind, transport is lagging behind. But the foundations of smart cities and smart villages are there. But what is it that we don't have enough of? What is it that is holding us back from a more rapid transition to be this competitive, smart environment? Is the digital knowledge and skills revolution. That is not fast enough. We're not generating the people, the kids in schools, the 6-year-old, the 7-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 18-year-old who is playing with digital tech so that they become the next generation who are literally building this smart environment with their brains, not with their hands, but with their brains. I'm not talking about young people going to elite schools, private schools, so-called Model C schools. I'm talking about young people at every school. That is the mission of the recently adopted National Digital Skills Strategy. Now, what does all of this have to do with the Portfolio Committee on Communications and the Portfolio Committee on Science, Technology and Innovation and other portfolio committees and select committees in Parliament? What does this bigger picture of science and innovation in general and digital innovation in particular have to do with the role of those committees which are, in a sense, more focused? I don't want to say more restricted. They are restricted, yes, but more focused on lawmaking and on overseeing particular departments, particular mandates, overseeing that the government, ministers, portfolios rather, are doing what they are meant to be doing. The point is that we can no longer separate the lawmaking context, the oversight context, and the real innovation environment, because every decision made in one committee relates to decisions and oversight in another committee. I'll make it very specific. the role of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee in considering, let's say, in oversight in terms of policy on spectrum issues, policy and regulation on spectrum issues, is crucial to how South African institutions in the private sector and in the public sector function in the market to build future-oriented network infrastructure for all the digital services that will sit on top of that network infrastructure. So there's a total knock-on effect. The discussions, debates, and decisions made in the Portfolio Committee, or rather taking place in the Portfolio Committee on Communications, are founded in a context where 5G networks, applications, services, and regulation are all being driven by innovation. Now, let's move to the science and innovation perspective, the portfolio committees and the select committees dealing with those matters. In 2020 and beyond, much innovation taking place in manufacturing, in health, in education, in services is going to require or already relies on digital technologies as a crucial contributing element or contributing technology to other forms of science and innovation. There's almost no aspect of science and innovation today that is not touched by digital technologies. So we've seen this major convergence happening in the last 20 years or so. And what that illustrates is convergence also between the ideas that are common in one area or mandate, like communications, converging with discussions, debates, and ideas that were previously common only in the science and innovation sphere. So let me just stop there before I go on. I am going to make this even more practical, but I just want to pause there for a moment and get a few comments. Agreement, disagreement, alternative points of view. Who's going to break the silence? Please go ahead. Please go ahead, Chairperson.
No, thanks, and greetings. Sorry to join late. I think you had an apology from us. But I just wanted to agree that indeed this requires a lot of collaboration between the portfolio committees in Parliament. I mean, we now have an example that I wanted to give, that, for example, communications would make an intervention by supplying IDTVs for matriculants who would at some point go to university and will still use the facility, which brings both the higher education as well as the basic education. But there's also a trade industry and competition side of things there that comes in. that in terms of what gets imported in the country, it would mean that trade, industry and competition should look at that. That at some point, probably you can declare that all those TV sets, whether they are imported or manufactured in the country, they would have to meet these standards for us to be able to move from analog to DTT as an example. So I'm just saying that collaboration, in my view, goes beyond just a few portfolios. It may be actually affecting the whole of governments. And I think it's now we think that way in terms of how we are putting laws and regulations, the better. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comment, please? Yes, please go ahead. That's Tebogo Leshope. Please go ahead.
Yes, it was previously Lucy, but I can add, one of the thought is what do we do to move towards an innovative state as a country? And we've been setting targets from a GDP perspective of 1.5%. The question is that enough? Now, digital technologies as enabler of other economies, one gets a feel it has to escalate a little bit to beyond 1.5. So what does this then mean for us is maybe public and private sector investment will have to rise to beyond this percentage. The one way portfolio committee could consider how to drive the state towards innovative, it's maybe to set it into policy, Lucy, to say each business or public sector activities should entail a percentage on innovation, like set a percentage beyond 1.5, maybe 10% in this regard. That's my view, that with policy-driven focus, maybe we can get there. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a very interesting debate and quite a lengthy debate. So I just want to say a few things. We set our policy goal as 1 point. In fact, initially, we set our policy goal as 1%. We got to, I think, 0.91, maybe we even got to 0.97%. And then we fell back. Then, not having achieved the goal of 1%, we set a goal of 1.5%. Now, 1.5% in the world is high. There are very few countries who are at 2%. I'm not sure the number of countries in the world, but I'm going to say that there are less than 20 countries in the world who are above 2% of GDP. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why did we not reach 1%? And while I think that I agree with you, I think we should push the envelope further, but there are constraints sitting behind that policy goal, one of which I've already mentioned. That is primary and secondary education. If we do not generate the numbers of scientists and innovators through the schooling system, they cannot proceed into the tertiary education system, and they cannot proceed into the science and technology performing institutions. So in other words, it may be that that policy, and I think these ideas come collectively from the portfolio committee responsible for science and innovation, and the one responsible for effectively digital communications. We've got to look at the constraints in the system, and the policy has to deal with that. We've got to look at the constraints in the primary education system, the secondary education system. What are we teaching at school? Are we teaching enough technology? Practical technology. It doesn't have to be so highly theoretical, because school kids really struggle with the way in which we teach physics, maths, biology, geography, because we are not sufficiently practice-oriented. And yet it is practice where the innovation system really starts to hit that 1%, that 1.5%. I'm not saying the theory is not important, but we need to do a lot more practice. Maybe in that way, we will propel more people into the higher education system more successfully by making science and technology more hands-on. And that may give us the possibility of having more people completing masters, PhDs, because the current level of production of masters and PhDs in South Africa, you know this, you've seen the reports, is not sufficient to take us beyond 1%, let alone 1.5% of GDP. So let us look at the digital perspective. What do I mean by practice-oriented? Can everyone see the screen, the precision agriculture screen? I'm hoping you can.
Yes, Lucy.
Yes, we
Okay.
can, Lucy.
Thanks. These technologies, sensors, remote sensing, automated steering systems, variable rate technology means this is sowing seeds. This tractor or this vehicle is sowing seeds. So you can vary the rate at which it sows the seeds. Integrated electronic communication. So this is collecting data. This might be Internet of Things, geomapping, maybe mapping the local climate, the weather system, high precision systems. All of this we're importing. All of this. It's not to say that importing is a bad thing. But if you're only importing and you're not producing for your own market and to sell to other markets, so you're importing some things from other markets and you're also selling to them, then your economy is in trouble long term. You may not realize it, but you are. This is what a manufacturing plant looks like today. There is artificial intelligence. There is knowledge in the machine in terms of robotic applications to produce many goods that are traded. And when people say, but what happened to the human beings? Where did they go? Are there no humans here?
A universal access and service strategy for Namibia.
Somebody is got their mic on by accident.
And provincial
Is it true that there are no human beings here?
a broadband strategy statement
I have to find out who is
on the
speaking.
knowledge economy.
Sandy, see where we can hear you. Sandy, see where we can hear you. Thanks. My question again, is it true that there are no humans in this picture? No, it's not true, because the humans have created all of this. The humans in this picture are operating at highly advanced levels of knowledge. The humans are designing the code, the software code. That is what we are competing with, and why our education system has to work and work so much better, because our education system is the foundation of our innovation system. One more thing, it is also true that there are no humans in this picture. But if I showed a different picture, we have what we call not robotics, but cobotics. Cobots means collaborative robotics, meaning that robots and humans are working together, collaboratively. But if we don't introduce that in our policy, if we don't introduce collaborative digital technology adoption, that is when we will fail, and we will open the door for technology to replace humans. If we don't want technology to replace humans, then we need to be explicit. Policy and other forms of engagement, decision making in the real economic context, in the health services, and so on. We need to be explicit about adopting technologies in a way that is collaborative, where teachers in schools are collaborating with technologies. Nurses and doctors in hospitals, hospitals and clinics are already one of the most technology intensive environments. But are we really collaborating? That's an example of human that's really a cobot, because the robot is there. And maybe because the doctor is not walking from ward to ward, seeing 5 patients in a ward literally for 1 minute each. When they say doctors are doing their rounds, that's what they mean. I don't know if any of you has been in hospital for any period of time. Have you? Nobody? That's what they mean by doctors doing their rounds. 1 minute per patient.
I have.
And how long did the doctor spend with you?
Maybe 1 or 2 hours.
1 or 2 hours?
Yeah.
In the ward.
Remember, I'm not talking about a side ward. I'm talking about a ward, an open ward.
Right.
If he is really serious with what he's doing, can take 1 to 1.5 hours.
Yeah, that's not true for the majority of doctors. There just aren't enough doctors to spend that kind of time per patient. But in this context, because the doctor is not moving from ward to ward, there is perhaps more time to spend on those daily or rather morning and evening ward rounds. I'm not talking about time spent in consultation. That's a different matter. Yes, when you're consulting with the doctor on an individual basis. Yeah.
Ma'am, with a patient, maybe just looking at a patient, it all depends how special is that patient. Sometimes it can take 5-10 minutes and then he walks out.
Yeah.
So if I talk about an hour or two, in those big wards, you know, in the big wards,
Yes.
where sometimes they are difficult patients. Thank you.
No, I agree. I agree. So this is an example of collaborative application of digital technologies. But we also see technology which is not necessarily applicable in a particular institutional context. It may simply be that people are using a wide range of technologies on a personalized basis. You might wonder what those shoes are doing there. A person with Alzheimer's wearing those shoes, who has perhaps gone off to the mall or to a nearby shop or taken a walk around the block, and who has now forgotten where home is. The tech in those shoes, the GPS positioning, may assist them will assist them, is designed to assist them to find their way back home. Obviously, this is not an elderly person with advanced dementia, but someone with early stage Alzheimer's could usefully wear this kind of wearable technology. So what are we creating? Not just in South Africa, but in the SADC region. What are we creating on the African continent? What is the extent of trade in digital goods and products of wearable technologies across the African continent? What would be the foundations to engage in that kind of trade? Well, the assumption would be that we have advanced network infrastructure, because the advanced network infrastructure allows communication. These wearable technologies are collecting data about the person. Let's say this person has diabetes, and some or many of these wearable technologies are constantly collecting data and sending that data to the relevant clinic, to the relevant physician who is looking after this patient. But that could only happen if the network environment, the device environment, the whole digital ecosystem was working effectively. And most importantly, if we had competitive prices. And we know that for 20 years or longer, all kinds of institutions, the policymaker, regulators in particular, the communications regulator and the competition regulator, more specifically, have had a mission and a responsibility to see prices come down, prices be more affordable. And we have seen greater affordability, but the affordability is not yet at the level where the majority of the population can utilize even one of these technologies. So a person or a community living on low income would need perhaps one of these technologies, maybe a smartwatch, that was sending data to the physician at the local clinic, that was being recorded on a database at the local clinic or on a national database that the local clinic in Shiwelo had access to. But in order for that to happen, we work on many assumptions. We work on the assumption that the Electronic Communication Sector Regulator, ICASA, is promoting or is engaged in regulation for more affordable prices. Basically, data must fall. We have had a Competition Commission ruling at the end of 2019, December 2019, on data prices and a number of recommendations. Now, the Competition Commission doesn't fall under either the Portfolio Committee on Communications or the Portfolio Committee dealing with science and innovation matters. And yet, what the Competition Commission decides is vital to what the business of the Portfolio Committee on Communications is. The desire of the members of the Portfolio Committee responsible for science and innovation to see greater innovation in South Africa, of which part of that is digital innovation, is dependent on an infrastructure and services environment and affordable pricing environment, which is looked after by another committee. So you could say that e-health or digital health and the future of digital health, not just for those who live in the high income bracket, occupy the high income bracket, but for more and more South Africans, that this question of affordability is a common concern across multiple portfolio committees. I'm moving on to talk about 3D printing, which is also part of this digital revolution, where we can now print, and these are just some examples, ears, noses, parts, body parts, synthetic body parts. And we can do this in South Africa. It's really not that difficult to do. We have a number of 3D printing facilities in South Africa, but we're not really breaking through that. I'm calling it an import barrier, but it's not an import barrier in the way one would normally talk about it. What tends to happen is if you need a titanium pin for your ankle because you broke your ankle, or you need a titanium pin for your leg, you need a the entire bone, that will be 3D printed in Germany. And you'll wait several weeks and it will arrive in South Africa, I guess on a plane or a ship. So the person who has been in the accident and has had their ankle crushed or their leg crushed will have that waiting period. Whereas our innovation system needs to evolve to really be engaged in these forms of technology innovation, design, and production that do not require multi-million rand investments. Yes, it does require money. It requires investment. It requires the hardware. It requires the knowledge and skill to use that hardware. But the entry level to this kind of technological innovation does not have as high a barrier as, let's say, space science or even automotive manufacturing. The design of experiential robotics, in other words, robots that are animated, robots that are not simply automated, but they are animated using artificial intelligence. Maybe it's not empathy, but it's a form of empathy. It's a robotic form of empathy. This is about software design. I almost want to say it's just about software design. It's simply about software design. In the age of software design rather than hardware design, we can be doing more. We can be jointly, collaboratively encouraging greater, much greater engagement in software applications design than we have done in the last 10 years. Even the hardware design is so much simpler today than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And of course, if we put all of this together, we get to the more advanced smart city. I was saying earlier that we're already on that path towards smart cities. And where is the Portfolio Communications Committee in this picture? The Konza Smart City Vision in Kenya, they had some hiccups. One always does. But Konza Smart City Park is there. The project management team is functioning. And here is the Portfolio Committee on Communications. It is behind the institutional ecosystem that ensures communications network optimization at affordable prices. And then maybe another committee, Trade and Industry, is behind the scenes of the intelligent factory. And maybe the Department of Transport is behind the scenes of the intelligent highway. And maybe the Department of Health is behind the scenes of the intelligent hospital, and the municipality is embedded here. But all of these, whichever committee is looking after whichever mandate area, whichever lawmaking, whichever oversight is required, they are all relying on the Portfolio Committee on Communications. Because without that Portfolio Committee, we have no intelligence in the system. We have no capacity to send data from one space to another, from one data repository to another. And we have little or no or limited capacity to do real, valuable data analytics. So while it might seem that the Portfolio Committee is only sitting behind this communications network optimization and also behind this smart grid, because smart grid is just intelligent networks talking to each other and saying, switch off, switch on, do this, do that. While the Portfolio Committee on Communications may be responsible for this, it is actually at the heart of what is required for a smart city, where data is flowing in all kinds of directions. And of course, other things that are not visible in this diagram are questions of cybersecurity. Questions which are common or should be common to every committee. The Portfolio Committee responsible for health matters needs to be very concerned about the security of personal data with respect to health systems. Health systems is one of the areas that is very vulnerable. There are significant cyber vulnerabilities, and there are many security breaches with respect to patient data, because cyber criminals are hunting personal data that is unprotected. Municipality data, we know that the city of Joburg had a breach in 2019. We've seen the recent breach with financial data. So that issue of commonality comes up over and over again. Now, I know that it was, I think, in the last few days, but definitely during the course of either this week or last week, the Portfolio Committee on Communications had some engagement with the broadcast services institutions. And when we think of broadcasting, we tend to think of either something very old-fashioned, like the SABC, but by the way, the SABC is not that old-fashioned. The SABC does not only broadcast on analog TV, it broadcasts on YouTube, it broadcasts on a platform called View, V-I-U, and those platforms are available on the internet. So you don't watch on TV. You watch on your laptop, you watch on your phone. I'm not sure if anybody has watched SABC on the View platform. You can put up your hand. Can we have a show of hands for that? Tanya, who else has watched SABC on View, V-I-U? Or on YouTube, either one. Tanya, were you putting up your hand for that, or did you have a question? Mr. Raboto Rahajane? Okay, great. So a few people have watched on View or on YouTube. But we're seeing even more advanced broadcast services, and I'm not talking about Apple TV, Netflix, and Showmax, DSTV. I'm talking about Internet Protocol TV, video on demand, over-the-top TV, and I'm talking about, I don't know if anybody has seen the Eurosport Cube. Anybody? Who's seen the Eurosport Cube? Mr. Rakhajani, is your hand up for Eurosport Cube or for the previous question? No? Okay, so nobody's seen the Eurosport Cube. So I'll just make quick mention about that. I'm looking at time, but we've got until 9, so I'll go a little bit quickly, but not too quickly. So in this example, and you can, I will send the slides and you can go and have a look at the Eurosport Cube, or just Google Eurosport Cube. There's so much available on it. It's a cube in which the broadcast team can participate in a mixed reality environment. In other words, what you're seeing in the cube is only virtually there. There may be some physical presence in the cube. The announcer or there may be a person in the cube. There may not be a person in the cube. There may be 2 people in the cube, one of whom is not actually there. There may be nobody in the cube, but it looks to you as if there are 1 or more people in the cube. And what is happening in this cube? I was going to use, well, they use the example of tennis, but I was going to use the example of skiing. The presenter for that particular portion of, and this is still proposed for the Olympic Games, would literally be able to feel the movement of the skiers that they are watching, or a particular skier that he or she has chosen to follow. And through augmented reality. In other words, transferring data from the skier who is physically skiing on a slope to the sports broadcast presenter in the studio. That sports broadcast presenter would feel the movement of the skier and perhaps even move, well, probably move in the cube as a way of experiencing the Olympic sport in a with more of their senses than what we do by simply watching. So when we're simply watching somebody skiing on the slalom course or whatever it is, we're simply observing with our eyes, with our brains, but our bodies are not feeling anything. But in this particular case, with the Eurosport Cube, the augmented reality experience means that the sports broadcaster is perhaps able to give a different kind of commentary because they are having a similar, or rather an augmented physical experience. The Eurosport Cube will create a virtual world that remotely connects the players in New York with guests, hosts, and experts from anywhere in the world. Here they're talking about the 2020 US Open. Sports broadcasting, and I'm just using this as an example because we can't talk about the whole of broadcasting, but sports broadcasting is set for massive digital innovation. And the nature of sports broadcasting is going to change significantly. South Africa being a highly interested sports country. Questions are, what are we doing as a country to create applications? What are our institutions where digital innovation is taking place? Whether it's at the CSIR, whether it's in the private sector, whether it's a tech hub, which I'm going to talk about just now. What kind of sports applications are we building? One of our students at our tech hub in Braamfontein, the Tshimologong Tech Hub, designed a sports application for soccer games, where fans could find out all kinds of information by downloading an app. Another of our colleagues at Tshimologong is designing apps for the postal service. We know that the postal service has been really struggling to maintain its reach. Post offices, physical post offices have closed down. Post offices that had much bigger square meterage now are just tiny physical buildings where not too many people go, because there's been such displacement of postal services by other digital technologies. And yet postal services too, just like broadcasting services, post and broadcasting are what we call Cinderella sectors. They were not well resourced with digital technology. So even as the telecom sector grew and grew and grew, and we had all kinds of mobile devices, and then we got all kinds of mobile apps, but broadcasting and postal were kind of lagging behind. That is no longer true. Broadcasting sector is coming on with strongly with hardware and software. The postal sector is coming on strongly with hardware and software. And so all these sectors are really just becoming digital business sectors. Telecoms is a digital business, postal is a digital business, broadcasting is a digital business. And financial services is being revolutionized by fintech. So the early days of fintech were debit cards, credit cards, things that you used at point of sale, and internet banking. This is now regarded as old fintech. Even internet banking is regarded as an early era of fintech. Automated robotic processing in the banking and financial system, that doesn't mean to say there are little robots running around. That's just software. And almost all banking and financial processing is software driven. We also saw in the last decade in many countries on the African continent, apps for mobile money, mobile payments, mobile credit, and mobile insurance. So even if you didn't have a bank account, you could still get credit because you have a data record on your mobile phone. And that record was good enough for some credit agencies to provide small loans, micro loans, very, very small loans. So just having a record and being an identifiable, traceable person put large numbers of people in countries like Zambia, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Uganda, Cameroon into an environment where they could obtain mobile credit. I don't want to talk so much about mobile insurance. I want to talk about IoT and short-term insurance. What that means is that if you have applications, an IoT application, which you get from your short-term insurance provider, and that IoT application is collecting data about you, your movements in your car. It collects lots of data about you and about others. And you can apply for insurance for the 1 week of the year or the 2 weeks of the year when you drive your car to the coast or to the mountains or to your home village, wherever it is you're going. So you don't pay a monthly premium because most of the year you're driving around the city. You're driving 7 kilometers to work and back, or you're driving 55 kilometers from Pretoria to Joburg to work and 55 kilometers back in the evening. And that's a standard process. You do it every day. It's limited risk. You don't necessarily want to insure your car, your motor vehicle, for your limited risk environment, but you do want to insure your motor vehicle for your high risk environment. And so using IoT, short-term insurance providers are offering very competitive rates for short-term insurance that is highly innovative. 2 weeks of the year for long distance, high risk trips. Similarly with your household insurance, you can insure your household goods for the same period that you are traveling. Let's say 2 weeks of the year. So you can still insure your house and your vehicle for high risk periods, but not for low risk periods. Now you could not do that previously because there was no capacity to collect, store, and analyze the data in order to do this kind of what they call predictive analytics. that allows short-term insurance providers to offer these new innovative models. And one more thing I want to talk about is RegTech. Any of the portfolio committees that deal with regulators, the Portfolio Committee on Communications, on Finance, RegTech, which is short for Regulatory Technologies, is really crucial in this very, very complex environment where, again, regulated entities have lots of data. So in the financial services sector, the financial services regulator, the FSCA, is regulating multiple banks and other financial services companies. The amount of data that they need to collect is become virtually impossible to collect manually, to analyze manually, and to make decisions. And so the FSCA is moving towards RegTech and SupTech, regulatory technologies and supervisory technologies, that enable them to regulate banks and financial services institutions using advanced data collection techniques and data analytics. And even regulators like ICASA need to be moving in this direction of RegTech, regulatory technology, where you introduce technologies to do some of the work that is too complex for the regulator. The volume of data is too great. Mining that data is not good enough. You need up-to-date data analytics on, for example, all the inputs that go into regulating pricing. You need that data. You need to collect that data over 10 years, over longer periods. You need to segment that data in hundreds of different ways. Companies are now doing what we call personalized pricing for mobile data, for mobile voice, for mobile services. How would regulators be able to regulate pricing fairness in a world of personalized pricing, where the mobile operators are collecting that data per person? My data is being collected, your data is being collected. We have options to pay different prices. We may not know that. We may not be choosing. We may not be selecting those personalized pricing options, but some people are. So the issues of fairness and equity in pricing that the regulator should be concerned with are not being effectively dealt with. And the regulator can only really deal with that by introducing things like RegTech. We may be concerned that this transition to fintech is very risky. Very risky because A, because money is involved, and B, because a lot of personal financial information is involved. Yet the world is moving very fast. In emerging markets, Brazil, China, India, Mexico, and South Africa, we're seeing 46% of organizations moving into the fintech space. And while South Africa is not a big adopter of mobile money, we are a big adopter of fintech. There we are. Average adoption in South Africa, average adoption rate of fintech in South Africa, 35%. That is fintech users as a percentage of the digitally active population. So amongst people who are digitally active, 35% of them in 2017 It's moved on today. Where's South Africa? Here we are. What are we mainly doing in fintech? One of the things where we're a big user, we're in the top 5 of fintech insurance. And we're seeing higher and higher rates of adoption. 3 out of 4 global consumers use a money transfer and payments fintech service. 96% of global consumers are aware of at least one money transfer and payment fintech service, suggesting that this inflection point has been reached. This tipping point has been reached. That despite the risk to financial transactions and personal financial data, because of the very attractive rates and fees, there's a big global swing to fintech. Let's just see, I'm not sure if South Africa is, there's South Africa. Consumer fintech adoption across 27 markets. That's 2019. South Africa is 82, ahead of Russia, India, and China. We won't stay there simply because they have so much bigger populations than we do. But what it illustrates, don't worry about the numbers, it's not a numbers game. What it illustrates is the extent to which South Africa is in that fintech environment. And fintech is dependent on networks. I'm skipping that. There are massive global transactions in the fintech world, deals. Who is buying what fintech? Are we playing in this environment? Yes, we're not the biggest global players, but we don't have to be. We just have to be players. We can even be players in the region, on the continent. There's a huge space for fintech expansion on the continent. South Africans are designing fintech applications. One of the tech hubs, I think it's the Bandwidth Barn Woodstock, is a major fintech design hub. Now, all of this future of digital innovation, whether it's fintech innovation, whether it's broadcast innovation, whether it's health tech innovation, whether it's ed tech innovation, yes, we can do all that. But one of the reasons we're not doing it is that it's not affordable to the vast majority of South Africans and other Africans on the continent. So because of the prices of data, because of data prices, there's very little apps adoption. And if there's very little apps adoption, there'll be very little apps innovation. So this ultimately, again, is a constraint. So pricing regulation with respect to data in particular is going to be a major issue for the next 5 to 10 years. And it is a constraint on digital innovation in general, on fintech, on health tech, and edtech innovation in particular. I'm jumping over those few slides to artificial intelligence and IoT. And here we see artificial intelligence combining with Internet of Things. It may seem that these are all things that are only found in high-income homes and environments, but that's our fault. It's not the fault of the technology. The technology is available to use in government-funded homes for the aged, it doesn't mean that we have to have all the technology. We don't necessarily need an old age home that is awash with technology if it's not affordable. But we can have homes for the aged. Now, this falls under the Department of responsible for social development, where artificial intelligence, IoT technologies can be used to minimize the risk of somebody falling and being left for too long a period of time, or someone suffering a heart attack and not being attended to instantaneously. These technologies enable the home for the elderly or the aged to be linked to the local clinic in such a way that there is no need for a phone call. The information will sound an alert to the particular doctor on call, and that doctor would immediately go off to the old age home, or an ambulance would be immediately dispatched. Something would happen. But is this really all about technology? Is this really far-fetched? Is it really all about technology? Of course it's not about technology. It's about people. It's a socio-technical system. This is what technology can do. But if we as people, the people working in the old age home environment, the people working in the local clinic, the people working in the primary healthcare center, the people working in the hospital if it's a heart attack, if we are not ourselves adapting to this environment for innovation, then the technology is meaningless. So I'm not by any means, making a purely technology argument. What I am saying, because of the nature of this meeting, where we are committees concerned with digital communications and concerned with innovation, I have been emphasizing the tech. But that is simply because your role is connected to making the tech possible. But then we have to use it. People have to use it. People have to adjust to the nature of the use. So it's techno-human interaction. But we can't have techno-human interaction if the infrastructure doesn't work and if the prices are not affordable. And just a final note here that these smart cities that we talk about, they're real. They're not just a figment of someone's imagination. They're not just an idea. They're not just words in a policy document. They're more than that. They're real. But here looms another digital divide. And this again is where policy comes in, that if we create smart cities and smart industries that are for the rich or for high and middle income groups, then we only have ourselves to blame. If we create smart energy grids and smart street lights and smart transportation only for certain people, then that's just another form of apartheid. But it was not created by technology. It was created by us. So I'm going to pause there because the next part of our discussion is going to be a little bit more theoretical. I've tried to be quite practical up to now. Maybe you'll say not practical enough, but let's talk. Let's have a few comments. Chairperson, I'm in your hands. You can invite any of the participating colleagues, members of portfolio committees, members of select committees to contribute. If I have not been sufficiently clear on the layers, understanding that the portfolio committee on communications operates at one layer, the technology layer. The portfolio committee responsible for science and innovation operates at another layer. The portfolio committees for health and education operate at yet another layer of the reality of change and services innovation. If I haven't been sufficiently clear about that, please do point it out to me, raise some questions, make some contributions. I might even call on, can I call on a few people to contribute? Princess Faku, Peter Zimri, Mlamli Boy, could we have a few contributions?
Hi, Prof.
Princess, please go ahead.
Prof, I just joined in now. My apologies. I'm coming from the house. So I was traveling.
That's okay.
Okay. My apologies.
Good evening, Lucy and colleagues and the portfolio committee members.
Go ahead, Mlamli. That will be lovely contribution.
All right,
from
thanks. Thanks for the opportunity and for the presentation, Lucy. I was wondering if there is a consideration to be made in terms of how we develop policy that can cut across sectors. For instance, when you talk about the role of the portfolio committee on communications, whatever we do within the portfolio committee on communications has got a very direct impact on all the other sectors, because what technology does, it cuts across all sectors. So my question then would be, is there any room for collaboration? I might probably have missed some of the workings of Parliament. I need to just remind myself whether there is any room for collaboration between the committees. For instance, the Education Portfolio Committee and the Communications Portfolio Committee, because we're trying to solve social problems. And I think my contribution would be that we should not be technology focused. I think let's try and find the problems that our world and our societies and our communities have, and develop policies and technologies that will solve those problems. And we can only do that if there is a collaboration between the different stakeholders, from a policy making point of view to an implementation point of view, in terms of how the different sectors collaborate to solve a particular problem. You mentioned earlier on, Lucy, an issue of technologies which could be used where you can select, for instance, an insurance cover for a certain period of low risk versus high risk. And I wondered whether any of us thought about reducing our insurance policies for households during the lockdown, because that was an opportunity. We were all at home, so hopefully we will not be burgled. So I think from what we're doing now as the Portfolio Committee on Communications, my suggestion, Lucy, would be that let's find possibly a way of collaboration from a policy-making point of view between different sectors or different departments or different ministries, and ask ourselves the question, are we solving the real social problem? For instance, in our environment, we've got a huge problem of universal access and universal service gap. The access gap is not getting better. We talk about 5G. We're trying to bring huge high-tech technologies to the urban environment. But in my village, Lucy, there's just one basic thing that we need for a start, is connectivity. And if we don't invest and we don't have policies which drive investment in connectivity, we can talk about 6G or 7G, but we'll still have these disparities in our societies that we currently have, and they are going to widen with time. That's my thoughts. Those are my thoughts and contribution. And I guess my question for you, Lucy, is collaboration between different portfolio committees on developing policies which are relevant to the societies. Thank you, Lucy, and Honorable Chair and members.
Thank you. Could we have one or two more inputs? Anyone volunteering to make a contribution? The sessions are intended to be interactive sessions. So I'm very keen to have a few more comments and inputs before I go on to the digital skills conversation. Yes, please go ahead, Honorable Leshope. If you just unmute your mic.
Oh, yes, sorry, I was saying I'm not a member of parliament. I'm just contributing to the topic, but I wanted to also tap your mind just on the overall system, looking at it from your knowledge base and benchmarking with the global trends, and also thinking about what are the impediments and enablers for South Africa. What do you think needs to be unlocked to improve creativity and innovation impact in South Africa? I think this conversation will also help the community quite significantly in the benchmarking knowledge that you may have. We're not that bad, but we're not one of the best as well. And then my second question is alongside the impact of fintech on innovation. Is there a direct correlation? I see Singapore only adopting 23%, but rated the highest still in the world. I think the China adoption of fintech makes sense to its output to global economies and exports and all that. But what is your sense with regards to fintech? Does it have direct impact on innovation in your view, adoption thereof? Thank you.
Okay, let's look at those few discussion points. Firstly, I first want to deal with the question of connectivity because I think it starts there. And that is one of the major responsibilities of the Portfolio Committee on Communications. But in my view, it should not be restricted to the Portfolio Committee on Communications. So general connectivity for the country as a whole, for the economy as a whole, for the society as a whole, requires the functioning, the effective functioning of relatively competitive markets, not perfectly competitive. Rebecca, I think you need to mute your mic. We can hear. Honorable Rebecca, please mute your mic. Thanks. So with respect to connectivity for the country as a whole, we need the effective functioning of network infrastructure and those operators responsible for providing the wide range of network infrastructure. That is at the level of markets for infrastructure and data services or internet services. But at the level of the education system and connectivity in the education system, that to me is a responsibility both of the Portfolio Committee on Communications and the Portfolio Committee responsible for education. It does not fit neatly in one or another. In fact, in this 21st century world, things don't fit neatly in a box or in a basket. They often cross over. And in the case of education, particularly in schools, this is a matter that cannot be dealt with by the Portfolio Committee on Communications alone. The Portfolio Committee on Communications can't necessarily call the Minister of Communications or the Department of Communications or the DG, my mistake. The Minister of Education or the DG for Education or the Department of Education to come and report why there is poor connectivity in schools. But if that discussion only happens in the Portfolio Committee responsible for education, that's also a problem. Whereas possibly a joint sitting of those two portfolio committees, calling on the ministry or the department or the DG from the education side and the operators and the CASA, creates a different conversation, creates a new conversation where we recognize that this is an ecosystem and that we need collaboration and competition to deal with the problems of the virtual absence of meaningful connectivity in schools. Not the fact that there is an internet connection in a school, really, that's not the concern. The concern is, can we run online classes in schools? Can we teach people from home? Well, that's an even more difficult conversation. But the connectivity that there is in schools is not real. It's not real. The networks may be there. The wireless connectivity may be there. Go to a school in Saldanha Bay. It's not real. And in many parts of the country. We are not teaching online. We have an e-education white paper 2004. We have an e-health strategy 2013, and we have a new e-health plan 2020 to 2024. This has to go beyond policy. Policy has to be real. Policy is not a piece of paper. And that is why, in response to Mlamli, I would say these two things go together. The digital divide, the digital divide that has increased exponentially in the last 10, 15, 20 years. We have many people, we have great coverage, 90% plus coverage. Coverage is not the real measure, is not the real test of an advanced digital economy, of South Africa being an advanced digital economy. We're not. The network infrastructure is there, but mostly it's not affordable, or it's not connected, or it's not effectively used. And if that is the case, there's a problem. So we may be pouring billions into network infrastructure that is not being efficiently used, effectively used, maximally used, optimally used. And that is not something that the Portfolio Committee on Communications can address on its own. That is where we recognize that we are one parliament, a single parliament. Many committees, one parliament. Can that be a slogan? I want to toy about that slogan. Many committees, one parliament. Many ministries, one government. The questions about fintech, some of the studies suggest that fintech adopters tend to adopt all kinds of technologies relatively easily. So the question is the adoption of digital technology in general a door into fintech, or is fintech a door into wider digital adoption? In other words, if someone is doing internet banking, does that mean that they're more likely to be keen to do education online? Or is it the other way around? We don't know. The answer is we don't know. What we do know is that if a particular user adopts any particular kind of technology, they may come in through the door of broadcasting, they may come in through the door of Netflix, they may come in through the door of internet banking, they may come in through the door of e-education, they might come in through the door of the Mom Connect app on their mobile phone. And the pregnant mother who has used Mom Connect for the first year after the birth of the child finds this Mom Connect app so useful that they start exploring other opportunities. But that is only if they find that they can actually use, and I think the Mom Connect app is free. Not sure whether it's free in terms of data, free data. You don't need data to use the Mom Connect app. I'm not sure about that. But this is another opportunity for digital apps, free digital apps design. You can have digital apps that you have to pay for, and we know there's lots of free apps online. There's free games, there's free weather apps. So we could be generating lots of apps, ones that you pay for, and lots of free apps, because free apps, Tebogo, will attract more people into the online space, whether or not they are fintech users. So those are just a few quick responses. And I don't want this to really be a question and answer session, but more that these are talking points. These are discussion points. I want to look a little bit more at innovation and incubating these technologies and these applications, particularly the ones that ride on the infrastructure. So yes, we have the network infrastructure, but the value doesn't lie simply in accessing the network infrastructure. We want to incubate technologies. We would start off with lots of ideas, but only some of these ideas would be viable. We would go into the incubation space where lots of software developers, apps designers, programmers, coders, whatever name you want to call them, are incubating their applications. But a few are designing the technologies of the future, the technologies that we will actually adopt. And that incubation process happens in something like this, something like a digital technology hub, where you have collaborative working, maker spaces, a little bit of socializing, producing content, movies, meetings, events, and lots of very good connectivity. If you went to any of the over 60 digital tech hubs in South Africa, over 600 digital tech hubs on the African continent, you might not see very much. You might see people sitting just writing code. But those are the fintech applications, the broadcast applications that we're talking about. Or you might see people, you know, these are teams, these are software teams. They could be sitting here engaged in a hackathon. They've been given a particular challenge, and they are all designing a broadcast content challenge, let's say. Or they might be working on a virtual reality challenge. They might be doing a 3D printing workshop where they are sharing knowledge. And this is very common, that in these spaces, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge sharing. But what these workshops and hackathons require is investors. And what those investors require is an ecosystem where data is affordable, so that the apps that they are investing in will be downloaded by users across cities, the perimeter of the cities, the peri-urban areas, the rural towns, and the rural villages. If nobody's going to adopt these apps for Mom Connect or Child Connect, then the ecosystem doesn't function. The network infrastructure is not effectively used. In 2016 or 2015, this is really a map of 2015, they counted 117 tech hubs in Africa. The barn, this is the bandwidth barn in Khayelitsha. In 2019, they counted 643 African tech hubs. This is where some of these are co-working spaces, some are accelerators, innovation hubs, and incubators. And this entire system is sitting on the foundation of high-speed bandwidth. The tech hubs need the high-speed bandwidth in order to produce the applications, and the users in all these countries, the hundreds of millions of users in all these countries, need good bandwidth in order to use those applications. So these tech hubs are innovation clusters. They are spaces where software developers cluster to use the available bandwidth and to produce the applications that will use, for which the bandwidth is being created. So this is the nature of the infrastructure, applications, innovation ecosystem. In the last 50 minutes or so, we're going to move on to talk about the digital skills environment. Did I cover your points sufficiently effectively? Oh, yes, this reminds me, one more thing I wanted to say in response to Mlamli and partly in response to Tsepo's points. We have seen what we call the first digital divide, which was voice. The second digital divide which was internet. The third digital divide, which was all the services that I've been talking about, all the services, the e-health, the e-education, the manufacturing. We've seen that massive divide at the level now, not only of voice, not only of simple internet access, but of all the services that require the internet or data. And we are seeing now the fourth, what I've coined the fourth digital divide, not the fourth IR, the fourth digital divide, which is skills. This is one of the major constraints to the further evolution. And this is the concern of all portfolio committees, because this applies to the communications environment specifically, to the health environment specifically, to the trade and industry environment specifically, to the safety and security environment specifically, to the science and innovation environment broadly. Is that the lack of digital skills or the limited availability of digital skills and the slow evolution of digital skills in fields like additive manufacturing or 3D printing, artificial intelligence design and use skills, and the foundation knowledge, mathematics and language-based skills for coding and for writing and applying algorithms. That is what will hold us back. We, in this world of the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution, 4IR, Industry 4.0, we are seeing the interconnection of everything. We're seeing something called digital twins, the phenomena of digital twins. We're seeing digital assistance and autonomous decision-making. I'm going to explain what each of those things are. Also, socioeconomic, I said it's not just about the technology. So this is the technology focus. This is the human focus. Socioeconomic development, social justice, public service, communities, and continuing education. In a recent business tech report, this particular economist from Efficient Group said that COVID-19 has wiped out a third of South Africa's middle class. A third of people who were perhaps professionals or have lost or are losing income, have lost or are losing jobs. He says, well, this is an estimate, 3 million jobs have been lost, 1 million permanently. He foresees rapid growth in some sectors such as the hospitality and restaurant industries. He says, but the bottom line is that the South African economy is broken and it's going to take years for it to recover. Now let's put that side by side with where South Africa sits in terms of being a digital economy. According to this analysis, South Africa is a business hub, but it is not a service powerhouse. It is certainly not an innovation hub. These are only the top digital economies in the world. We are not a prosumer. We don't produce, we only consume. Prosumer is a conflation of the words producer and consumer, but we are not there. We don't produce nearly enough. We consume so much more than we produce. So we're a business hub, and it may be that we are going to fall back from that business hub. These countries who are global digital factories, global service powerhouses, digital service powerhouses, digital prosumers, and digital are going to recover more quickly, more easily. Countries like China are already using digital technologies in their recovery. But we are not operating on that basis. So let's look at what a what a digital industry how a digital industry would operate, what platforms it would operate on. This is based on thinking about design principles for digital industry. I'm not going to call it these numbers of for this and for that and 4.0. I'm just going to say digitalized industry is operating, these are the trends: interconnection, information transparency, decentralized decisions, and technical assistance. Now let's take the first one, interconnection. Everything is interconnected. It is either interconnected because we interconnected as people, like we are interconnected now. We don't need to be physically in the same space. At the height of this meeting, there were 59 people. There are now 50 people in this meeting. We are interconnected. We are sharing information. But interconnection goes to the point where we don't even need to be together in virtual space. We don't need to be together at the same time. This meeting is being recorded. 3 hours of content is being recorded. The people who left early can go and listen to this recording. The people who are here now can listen to the recording again. You can send the recording to a department or a regulator or a colleague in Parliament who wasn't in attendance. So we can share information, and which enables us to reach common goals by virtue of this kind of interconnection. And you're doing it all the time. I think some committees are using virtual platforms and recordings every single day. Let's move on to the next one. Information transparency. This is an interesting one. There are many ways to create what we call a digital twin. But what is a digital twin? A digital twin is the virtual reality of the real problem. So here we are in the physical world. Here's the physical world. And in the physical world, we have certain physical interactions, certain physical phenomena, and we have a problem that we can't solve. Let's use the example of a situation where many parliamentary committees want to meet together on a regular basis, just as we were talking about earlier. But they don't only want to meet as parliamentary committees, they also want to meet with the departments, the regulators, the entities that are continuously reporting to them. And they want to have a major gathering, which we cannot do in the physical world, and which may even be difficult to do in the digital world, you know, having 500 people online at the same time. Already there are difficulties in this meeting. Very few people are, it's not as interactive as we would like it to be. So how do we create a really interactive meeting when we are in the digital world? Well, we can model it. So we can model that problem of creating an online meeting where we don't invite real people. We have a virtual meeting made up of avatars, and we see what is required to have a meeting where 500 people are actually participating online. Maybe with little meeting groups, There are breakaway. If we can do that in the physical world, let's model that in the digital world. Let's create a digital twin of a big conference with many breakaway sessions. So that would be an example of information transparency. And if we solve that problem, if we know what, because we don't know what a virtual conference looks like in the digital world. There's a lot of experimentation all over the place. We're coming up for the, is it the 5th Sub-Saharan Africa Spectrum Conference, which is all going to be online. It's the first time it's ever happened. We don't know how it's going to work. We don't know what the problems are going to be. We don't know how to solve those problems. So we can model that in the digital world. We model it. We use algorithms to create avatars. We create a model of the digital environment. We need data to create those models. And then we are able to hold a really good conference about digital policy making. This comes back to Tebogo's question about how do we, not just we must collaborate, how do we collaborate in the digital world? What are the forms of engagement? So we would model that. And then having modeled that, we would know what the solution looks like. And we can then hold that conference in an efficient and effective way. Decentralized decisions. So in factory contexts, for example, or in industrial manufacturing contexts, a lot of the routine, the rote decision-making is autonomous decision-making. It's being made by software. The automated robotic processing that is happening in the background. The lines of code. And the humans are invested in higher level decision-making. So instead of humans running around solving small routine problems over and over and over again, humans are spending more time making higher level decisions, complex decisions where there are conflicting goals, where there are exceptions, where you can't just follow a simple logic. And then technical assistance. So this relates to the example I mentioned earlier about mining, where the human is not the operator, but where robotics is able to do the kind of technical, industrial, or mining or agricultural work that is really unfit for humans. We no longer have the excuse to employ humans to do highly dangerous, highly inappropriate work and pay them almost nothing. We need to transition to an environment which I agree is still far away from us because we haven't yet built and advanced our education system such that the humans are the people building the robots, building the artificial intelligence, building the coding for software, for autonomous decision making, doing the digital twin modeling, and so on. I mean, these are just examples in our context. There are many examples outside of the pure digital context, but our discussion is about digital. The humans, we haven't created the education system. I'm just running through this. That is putting our young people into the smart cities, the digital tech hubs. But that ultimately is why we are a democratic country, why we fought for democracy, so that we can advance. That democracy is a foundation for us to move up these levels. We may never be an innovation hub because we're just not big enough in population size, comparatively speaking. We're just not attractive enough in terms of investment. We may never be a service powerhouse. We may never be a global factory. But there is no reason why we cannot be an efficient prosumer. Because that category of innovation does not require the country to be big. It simply requires the country to both produce and consume, not simply consume. So this is these are some of the advances required. Sorry that I have to scroll like this, but my view of the training session is in the corner of the screen. So that's why I'm scrolling. So if we put this together, these design principles, the 4 layers, the little explanation, this is the technology layer. This is the policy layer. If we were saying to ourselves, so what's the policy issue coming out of this? Because we don't make policy about technology. Technology is there. The policies are related to how do we see interconnection and Internet of Everything advancing our schooling system, advancing our health system? How do we see autonomous decision making advancing our manufacturing system? How do we see robotics advancing our health system and our mining industry? This is where the policy decision making lies. And when it comes to digital skills, then it traverses everything. So policy or strategy for digital skills will relate to the whole system, the technology side and the policy side. These are new jobs. With skilled people able to operate, and this is a very tiny sample of technology, but these skilled people, men and women, young men and women, are highly knowledgeable and technically efficient in operating these and other technologies. VR, AR developers, data visualization specialists, AI developers, data scientists. We have in South Africa a few universities doing data science degrees. We have only one university, one in the whole of South Africa, that has a data science degree at undergraduate level. That is Sol Plaatje University in Kimberley, SPU. And yet what we need is lots of data scientists for the future. The Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone needs data scientists. We need to be introducing the basics, the very basics of data science. In fact, it's there in the curriculum. Algorithms are there in the curriculum, but not designing algorithms. And our maths and science foundations are, as you know, very weak to create large numbers of people who can do these future jobs and others. I mean, I have, this is just a smidgen of the types of jobs that are available. You can reproduce these many times over. You'll have specialist AI developers for health, specialist AI developers for education, specialist data visualization technicians for mining, specialist mobile apps developers for education, for social security. And then we move beyond the industry perspective to the society perspective. How do we foster community development? What is the kind of, if we're looking at community gardens for sustainable food supply in low-income urban areas, how do we deploy digital technologies? How do we deploy drone applications? We have to stop thinking about these technologies as technologies that are beyond the reach of communities. That is where our policy has got to take us. If we don't know how that has to be done, if we don't know it now, we need to figure out how that has to be done. This is not because technology is a must. This is not because we've just all got to be about technology. We don't have to. We don't have to. Where other solutions are more convenient, we'll do that. But we do not currently have sustainable food supply in urban areas. We are not growing enough food, especially for low-income communities, enough nutritious food at low cost in urban communities or in rural communities, enough variety, etc., etc. And if drone applications can be used effectively in those contexts to monitor, to gather data about smallholder farming or even just urban farming, then we need to migrate to and encourage those applications. We recently had a challenge, a community challenge where young people across, I think it was 5 provinces in South Africa, Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, were doing a digital applications challenge. And one of the top presentations was from someone interested in urban farming, in people's gardens at home. But in order for him to coordinate that and to communicate, let's say he was starting a club of urban farmers, then drone applications are very relevant. You can send out that drone to monitor certain activities, and you can use that information to guide people, to train people in better, more advanced urban farming. The social justice perspective. There is the side of equitable access to the benefits of technology. So that relates very much to the digital divide, but it also relates to the disempowerment of people and communities in a technically undemocratic environment. So equitable access to technology and its benefits, not just the mobile phone. It's, you know, if we have a mobile phone, but we cannot receive the WhatsApp messaging from the university or from the urban farming facilitator, because we have to switch off our WhatsApp because we don't have data, or our WhatsApp just doesn't receive the data being communicated, the online magazine, because we ran out of data on the 5th day of September. And if the magazine is sent once a week, we're not getting the urban farming magazine sent by this person in the Eastern Cape who is collecting data using drone applications. He's collating data. Then he's designing content for the online magazine that is shared on WhatsApp. Then we don't migrate to empowered communities that are technically democratic. The public service perspective, I spoke about Mom Connect, but why is it that we only have Mom Connect? All these years, Mom Connect, I think, comes from about 2013, if not earlier. It's only for the age group from birth to 1 year. There was some focus on Child Connect, where that Mom Connect program would be expanded. But why do we only have Mom Connect? Why don't we have Child Connect? Why don't we have Elderly Connect? Why don't we have Women Connect? Why don't we have Men Connect? Why don't we have Men's Health Connect? Why don't we have Gender Equity Connect? Why? So the public service perspective is that we literally need hundreds of applications for all the public services that we could gain value from. And then I said the continuing education perspective, where we can learn whatever it is we need to learn. We don't only need e-education for school. We need e-education for every age group, for people in their 20s, people in their 30s, people in their 40s. I'm saying this because I'm about to turn 60. And I'm thinking, okay, so what does it mean to be in your 60s? What do I want? And can I get that on an app? And that's how we should all be thinking. And we should all have access to those possibilities. So this is just a picture of when we put it all together. That AI or 3D printing, additive manufacturing, or coding should not be considered as something for the elite group of South Africans that are in some income bracket. The role of policy and related law and regulation, and obviously law and regulation is limited. We don't put everything into law. We don't put everything into regulation. But we do put issues of competition in providing network infrastructure. That is crucial for law and for regulation. Personal data privacy, that is crucial for health applications. Because the more people that download health applications, the more some of their personal data is in cyberspace. So the POPI Act becomes important. And the policy community, the lawmakers, the regulators responsible for personal data privacy become important. But this lecture was not so much about those individual areas of law and regulation. It's rather about the bigger picture. This is the lecture or the discussion or the workshop, the online conversation about the bigger picture and how they all fit together, and the importance of a conversation across portfolio committees, select committees, policymakers, and regulators. This is that conversation. We can have other conversations where we say, okay, for today, let's just focus on personal data and privacy. But that is not the conversation for today. And the discussion really ends there, is that we are looking at more powerful digital futures. We want to build powerful digital futures as one of, it's not the only foundation for a 21st century South Africa. It's by far not the only foundation. We're human. We're not only about We have funerals, we have birthdays, we mobilize, we congregate, we commune around human activities. But if you're on WhatsApp, you're communicating about your birthday with your loved ones, or they are communicating with you on WhatsApp. If there's a funeral in your family today, they are sharing information on WhatsApp. They've created a family group, or they're just sending each other messages of condolence. They're planning, they're making their financial contributions, and some of them making those financial contributions are using fintech. So this is not a question of, will this world come into being? It is in being. It is real. It could be more advanced, and policymakers, regulation and regulators, and people engaged in the oversight function through Parliament are all part of that ecosystem. The only question is, are we on the side of advancing that ecosystem for the benefit of South Africans? Or are we on the side of holding things back? We have about 18 minutes, 20 minutes or so left for the session. I have nothing more to say. So again, let me open the floor for contributions. How does this play in the context that you are responsible for? How does this play in, I'm not sure if there are participants from the health environment, participants from the education environment, participants from the financial services environment, or any other trade and industry. Let's have a few contributions. Chairperson Maneli, over to you.
No, I think with regard to hands, because I wanted to participate, you can note the hands, Lucy, because I was raising mine to participate.
Okay.
The discussion, yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, because I've been in and out because of load shedding in the space I'm in. I'm not sure, maybe this point would have been raised before, because I lost you. I think you were dealing with smart cities and then came back when you were quite far. That I think besides the interdepartmental or portfolio collaboration, one looking at that peak of the smart city. In the context of South Africa, there's what has been introduced by President in the 6th Parliament as a district development model, which then brings a point about, yes, that's the one, about the different spheres of government, which is your province, your national and local government. It would be interesting to know how the Kenyans are dealing with that aspect of the different spheres, because in other countries, they do not really recognize the other spheres as spheres, but tiers of government, which with a strong central government that makes policy and regulation affecting everyone without really much of consultation. Now I'm raising it because I think with a policy direction from the department with regard to high-speed or rapid infrastructure deployment.
Yeah.
Already the reaction on the ground has been about private property and all that. But when you look at it, necessarily the proposal seeks to deal with the red tape that you have at different levels so that the government works in a seamless way in delivering on the broader mandate, right? So it would have been also helpful just to know how the Kenyans probably are going around this, or whether maybe we have got different systems. I'm saying this because in the country you have an opening that if one sphere of government is not happy, can even go to court to stall the process, just like other players would do. So I'm raising it, as I say, because there's already this policy that's on the table for a discussion, and already you have got that reaction on how we can get that together. I think that's one issue I wanted to raise. Second, is really that if you are looking at a country that produces and consumes, I think that's also where the collaboration comes in, because there are also other factors that affect those that need to invest. That if the regulation and policy side is rigid, they would also be saying, look, the production costs here would be much higher for me to deliver on the same thing that I could have delivered cheaper elsewhere, and I would rather import it, which then forces us to be indeed more of consumers than people who can produce. And that then talks to policy incentives and so on that come into play in that regard. And maybe if I can tease you on this, having been following how government works over time. At a time when the country had problems, there was introduction of an accelerated growth for South Africa, the SKISA.
Yes.
And there was an appreciation that for you to reach that point, you would need to train it with skills development, which then brings the CHIPSA on the side. Now that we have this challenge of technology that advances, and you talked about skills revolution,
yes,
what could be expectations then from a policy and regulation point, understanding that even with the technologies that we are dealing with today, there will be changes in the near future because of innovation that's there in the different parts of the world, forcing people to move to another level. So how would you advise in that regard? So those are the 3 points I wanted to raise. Thanks. As I say, they may have been raised, but I've been in and out. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to just deal with 2 of those points. The one about the rapid deployment. I would say that the thinking in this sector, in the sector of communications infrastructure, needs a major shift in how we think about the future economy. It appears to me that we currently, and when I say we, I mean the mobile operators, government, the regulator, all the different parties, we still think about infrastructure markets in the same way that we did when we had an analog telecom system, and you had individual companies competing with each other to get or to cut everybody else out of the system. So we must only have limited players in the market. Because unless we have limited players in the market, those individual players can't make the super profits that they are seeking. And the only way to do that is to exclude others, to raise barriers to entry. So all the contestation that we see, let's take this issue, you can't do this, you can't make this decision, we're taking you to court. That is all about a model of infrastructure markets that says that certain players can only win if other players are excluded. But if we look across the world, if we look at trends in not everywhere, but in a few other countries, we see that that is not the case. Many new entrants have come into the market. In fact, even in South Africa, new entrants have come into the market. And still, Telkom, Vodacom, MTN have continued to grow. I'm talking about new players in other parts of the infrastructure market. So in the fiber part of the market, in the dark fiber part of the market, in the tower part of the market, there are all kinds of players because the ecosystem grows and you can have players so who are new. Let's say we're talking about new players in the rural towns that are not well served. So there's been a lot of push to not see that side of the market evolve. And yet, here's a hypothetical. It's just a hypothetical reply, okay? I'm not saying that these things will happen. They're a sure case. They're not a sure case. It will only happen if the governance, the market governance, the regulatory governance really works. But here's a hypothetical. New entrants build network connectivity in rural villages. That enables communities living in rural villages to participate in the digital economy. They're not participating now. They're not participating in the digital economy. They're not producers. They're not using apps. They're not creating apps. They're not selling things online. But in this hypothetical of mine, the creation of these networks by new entrants to the market enables them, that is these communities, to participate in some way in the digital economy. And the economy of those villages begins to grow. Maybe they're selling rural tourism. I love this example. I like to use this example of the Etosha Pan in northern Namibia. Very few people will go to the Etosha Pan. I would love to go there. I can tell you it's a heck of a trip to get there. You know, it's far. You can fly, but mostly you should drive. But I can go to the Etosha Pan virtually. And perhaps there would be some virtual tour package deal that I would pay. Maybe I'd pay $10 US for it, or I'd pay 200 Namibian dollars for it. You get enough people paying $200 for a virtual tour of the Etosha Pan. That's potential money flowing into the communities in that environment. Or some mountain area in the Eastern Cape in South Africa. You can't go there because you can't go everywhere, but you can do a virtual tour from your home and you'd be willing to pay, you know, like I say, 200 Rand for that virtual tour. Well, you just need a few 100,000, 200 Rands. That is quite something. And of course, you can continue doing that because you can change the nature of the virtual tour. So then these possibilities begin to emerge. And in my hypothetical, there's more income in that village. And that village says, no, but we now want to get onto, you know, we want to migrate onto the 4G, 5G network infrastructure. And the quality of this network, this local network, the bandwidth, the speed is not as good as we want. But we've now got the money to afford, which we didn't have before. And that's why the operators, the major operators, didn't want to build high quality networks for our village. So I hope I'm being clear how this hypothetical goes. And that is what vision means. That is the vision that you would have. And that requires leadership. It requires painting those hypotheticals over and over and over again for these entities or individuals or leaders or private sector decision makers who think that the answer is to go to court. But if we are not painting those hypotheticals in some idea of conveying visionary leadership, people will carry on going to court. So that was the one point I wanted to comment on. And then the skills question. So we have just adopted a national digital skills strategy, which we are about to invest in terms of implementation plans and so on and so forth. And my sense is that this implementation plan is a real opportunity to try to break some of the skills barriers that we are experiencing. Break some of the skills barriers to say, how are we going to change education? Not just how are we going to solve the existing problems in education. Some of the existing problems, we can't solve them, you know? We cannot teach better maths. We cannot, I will put my head on a block. We cannot get better maths education results in schools if we do not transition to using applications in digital software. We call it dynamic software, where the kids can see that triangle moving. If we tell them to visualize it in their minds, we're asking for the impossible. But we have software where we can present that to them. They can visualize so many things by looking at the visualization of what the software does, whether it's triangles, whether it's circles, whether it's, you know, what is the relevance of triangles to the data that a drone is collecting. Where we can do so much more applied, practice-oriented mathematics. Why are you learning this geometry? Why are you learning this algebra? Oh, this is what marine engineers do with this algebra or this geometry. Yes, at a more advanced level than what you are learning. But if you learn this, could you be a marine engineer at the SBIDZ 20 years from now? Yes, you can. But if we just tell kids, we just say to them,
it's 21 hours.
You know what, you could be a marine engineer. Why would they believe you? Can't see it, they can't visualize it. But with a lot of the digital technology, we can map, we can visualize that evolution with them from mathematics to marine engineer in the SBIDZ. But standing in front of a chalkboard in the classroom, you cannot do that. Cannot do that. They won't believe you. They'll say, these people, they're talking nonsense. They're just old people talking nonsense. And yes, they might still say that. And when I say that, I mean, I'm thinking about myself. I'm that person. I'm that person who went to Saldanha Bay, some silly 59-year-old woman going to Saldanha Bay, trying to tell teachers that they should teach the kids using applications in dynamic software so that one day they can become marine engineers. Well, we had to walk that talk. And I think we all have to do that. Policymakers, members of parliament, you go to your wards, you're in, your ward environments when you're not in a parliamentary sitting. This is the 21st century digital leadership that we all of us are going to have to engage in to see people even want to do that kind of skill development. Because I've had it thrown back at me, but Lucy, why must we do this? Why should we as teachers learn this? Really? I'm going to be a marine engineer? You're joking. And we have to walk through that visualization of the evolution of skills. So I come back to saying we have this opportunity now with the National Digital Skills Strategy. And that National Digital Skills Strategy is relevant not only to the Portfolio Committee on Communications, but to every portfolio committee. And, perhaps that's the next thing we could do. It's just been adopted, Chairperson. That could be something that could be a focus. The latter slides the latter part of my presentation with those slides, that was some of the background work for that National Digital Skills Strategy. But the strategy is more than that. And perhaps that is something we could dig into, given your last question. Back to you.
I know that we have been given an indication that it's 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
May I just check if there are any other contributors at this point before we can wrap up and thank Lucy? I don't see any on the system. No. Okay, so no, I think from our side we really appreciate, and the sense I have, Lucy, from members who have been attending this series of lectures that you've been offering from the Link Center, is that it has indeed helped us to improve the work that we do from the side of the Portfolio Committee. And of course, there's interest, I think, even from the other corners in Parliament. As I was leaving Parliament this evening, I was asked if people can just log in just to observe how things go, because they would also want to get into some program next time. So we really appreciate, and maybe just one other point, it's really that even from the participants we get to learn more, because others are specialists in the field, and they deal with these matters at an operational level and so on. But I think more importantly, it helps us as those that play oversight to also understand the sector that we're playing oversight on. And I think some of the things that we may want to come back to, like the point you've raised now about the adoption of the national strategy on digital skills, are things that we may want to get back to, and we really appreciate. Without waste of time, I really thank you and all the participants for participating up to now. Thanks. And I think for anything further, our content advisor who's been working with you will be advising us accordingly. Thank you. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, colleagues. Good evening and go well. Bye
Thank you.
now.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Very much.